What's going on, everybody? I'm John. Welcome back to Reddit Aliens. We're going to talk about something interesting today. What's a time where you thought, yep, I'm dead, but you survived? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was 11. I had just developed asthma, and my mother refused to quit chain smoking in the house. One night, I have a severe attack. I'm trying to use my rescue inhaler, and it's not working. Each time I try to inhale, it just goes right out my nose. I panic. I vividly remember my mother smoking a cigarette as the panic is giving way to hypoxia. She's screaming at me to use my inhaler. Right before losing consciousness, I realized that was it. I'm dead. There wasn't a whole lot of life to flash before my eyes. A sense of calm and peace settled over me as I collapsed. My parents did CPR on me until the paramedics arrived. I woke up in the ICU days later with a tube down my throat. The doctors were surprised I survived. My mother never smoked in the house again after that. The car was still fair game for her, though. I was choking on food, almost a full blockage, and couldn't get any air in. After several attempts to get it out, it sunk in that it was really lodged in my throat, and I was screwed. Started to feel dizzy, and everything moved slowly. I remember thinking what an embarrassing way to die, and that I didn't want my kid to be watching. It was at breakfast. I started dialing 911 when my husband came up behind me and started first aid. He got the blockage out, and I started vomiting everywhere. It was very intense. I still went to get checked by a doctor to make sure my lungs were clear because I felt dizzy for hours after, and my throat was raw. Took a day or so to heal. He 100% saved my life. House explosion. 3 years old, Edmonton, Alberta. I vividly remember standing next to a stove that someone was fixing in the basement apartment of my dad's friend's house, who we were visiting. And next thing, I was opening my eyes in the daylight outside. I completely blacked out while the gas stove exploded and I landed clean in the driveway. My dad and mom were on the front page of the Edmonton Journal, 1993. I remember distinctly thinking the brightness was heaven and that I had died and fell into heaven. My baby sister had died several weeks prior to SIDS, and my mother and father had to explain where she had gone, and I thought I was in heaven, but it was this guy. Had a car crash into my house and hit me when I was a child. I was sitting on the couch at the time, and it hit me. Drove through the next wall into the garage, then came to rest on top of my lap, pinning me down to the couch with its full weight. I won't go into too much detail about my injuries, suffice it to say that it was pretty gory. It took over an hour for the emergency responders to get me out from underneath it. That hour is foggy at best. I remember so much pain, and at some point I felt this overwhelming sense of peace about the situation. Like I instinctually knew that all I had to do was let go, and the pain would stop. I started to let go, and I began slipping away. The pain stopped, the world slowed, and everything started to fade to black. It felt like I was floating on water, and all the fear and agony were taken away, far away from me. I snapped back into myself to the sound of a firefighter yelling at me to stay awake. Immediately, the pain returned and I was fully here again. Didn't hit me until much later in life that I was interrupted in the middle of the death process. I was kidnapped. A guy approached me at a gas station in the middle of the night. I had just gotten off of work and asked for a ride. I said no, obviously, and he pulled out a massive knife and insisted. Of course, I agreed at that point because I wasn't trying to get stabbed and asked where he wanted to go. He directed me to a sketchy motel in the bad part of town, holding the knife on me the whole way. As we were pulling into the parking lot, I thought for sure this was how I was going to die. He got out of the car first, and suddenly 2 guys came out of nowhere like effing crackhead guardian angels and jumped the guy who had kidnapped me. From the little I heard, he must have owed them money. I didn't stick around to find out. I hauled ass out of that parking lot with the passenger door of my car wide open. I still can't believe I lived through that. Well, and some people say crackheads serve no good purpose. There's one example. I was a director of one of the largest museums in the United States and walked out on stage to give a pretty controversial presentation. I was already pretty nervous. There's a loud bang from the center of my head. I don't feel my body drop, but I can tell that I've hit the floor. My vision blurs and turns red, and in the 3 seconds after the bang, I come to the conclusion that I've been shot and have seconds to live. I'm a very large man, and as I'm fading out, I see my friend, the 90-pound, 40-kilogram museum nurse, trying to pull me up. I was in shock, and the pain didn't really faze me, but damn did it hurt. Indescribable agony that in 2 seconds made death seem like mercy. I accepted very calmly that my nurse friend's face was the last thing I'd ever see, and faded out. I got to die a dramatic death and live to tell about it. I woke up 4 hours later in the hospital after an emergency surgery. I hadn't been shot after all. I somehow had an abscessed wisdom tooth that had become highly infected, and the abscess exploded upward into my head, splitting the tooth from tip to jaw and breaking my left melixa. It erupted with such force that my eyes bled and the pain knocked me out. While I was out, my wisdom tooth was pulled without anesthetic and the infection drained. I get phantom twitches just thinking about it. Wow. 4 a.m., driving down the highway at about 70 miles per hour. Out of nowhere, absolute torrential downpour. Before I can even turn off the cruise control, I start to hydroplane. My rear end comes off the road and I do a 180 and then, somehow, without flipping it, end up doing a huge 360 through the median and back up onto the highway. I ended up in the same lane as I started in, facing the right direction and still moving forward. No other vehicle involved or even in sight due to the time of day. It was nuts, and it felt like it was happening in slow motion. And the whole time I'm just thinking to myself, when it flips, I'm dead. I pulled over at the next exit and let the adrenaline clear out of my system while still barely believing that had happened. I was 13, in the first few weeks of a new school year at a new school. I was staying after school with another student I carpooled with, trying to make friends. He took me out to the woods behind his house and showed me a tree he liked to climb with a few boards across the lower branches to sit on. We climbed into the very upper branches of this half-dead pine tree, and I forgot that the kid was tiny and possibly 50 pounds lighter than I was. I thought I was dreaming the moment the branch snapped. I was falling from 30-some feet up in a tree. This couldn't possibly be real, right? That illusion was shattered when I hit the first branch. Then I was pretty sure I was going to die. I plowed through several more branches on the way down, which scraped me up but fortunately absorbed energy in breaking the dry branches instead of my bones. It probably helped that I landed on a pile of branches instead of hard ground as well. When I hit the ground, I had a moment to think, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought. And then I screamed, because it was still pretty bad. However, I stood up and hobbled away, cut and bruised all over, but not seriously injured. My poor mother was not amused. I was investigating a fire out in the middle of nowhere. It was a single-wide trailer with a brick house built around it, which, if you don't know, trailers burn like a torch, and the brick means all the heat stayed inside, making everything extremely unstable. I was walking through taking my photos and accidentally stepped on a part of the roof that was somehow still attached to the brick wall that was still standing. The entire brick wall then fell on top of me and buried me. It hurt like a son of a bitch. I don't know if you know what a brick wall falling on you feels like, but everything hurts everywhere. I laid there under the bricks for probably 5 or 6 minutes trying to figure out just how injured I was, if anything was broken, and if I was going to lay there until I died, because I had no cell service and no one was going to see me if I couldn't get myself unburied. I'm in the middle of a completely burnt building, miles away from anywhere, buried under a brick wall. I thankfully only had scratches and bruises and managed to dig myself out after a good while, but good lord, was I sore for a while. Even though I haven't had the pleasure of a brick wall falling on me, your description and my assumption probably close in line. Sounds like it would be pretty crappy. Glad you're okay. While transferring work locations, I was staying with a cousin of mine at the new location. Her psychotic, alcoholic, drug-addled, vicious ex-boyfriend, who she had just kicked out of her house, was stalking her. He saw me move in, assumed I was the new boyfriend, and lay in wait for me outside her house one night where he jumped me from behind and slit my throat. Despite losing massive amounts of blood, I didn't die. I didn't even feel that bad. So while he was trying to break into her house, presumably to kill her too, I grabbed a baseball bat from the trunk of my car and beat him until I passed out. When I woke up, I wasn't thinking all that clearly, so I went inside, cleaned myself up, and drove to the hospital. My cousin wasn't even home at the time. She had gone into the city with her mother for the weekend to see a show and to go shopping. The attacker and I ended up in the same ICU. I had rendered him a quadriplegic. There was a great deal of civil and criminal legal bullshit to deal with, but in the end I was cleared of any wrongdoing, and he was put on probation for 10 years. As he was no longer able to do so much as brush his own teeth, his lawyer, provided by his wealthy family, convinced the judge or DA that he was no longer a threat to anyone, and the state would be spared the burden of providing him the round-the-clock care he needed if he wasn't sent to prison. I was left in massive debt, which took me many years to pay off. I did sue him for the injuries I sustained, but despite being a trust fund baby from a wealthy family, he himself was indignant. He'd blown his trust fund on drugs, booze, and gambling and had nothing. His family provided him with everything, including his lawyer. He died about the same time his probation ended. Motorcycle accident. I debated commenting, but decided it was worth mentioning. Got thrown off the bike going 80 miles per hour because of a car trying to merge into me. In the moment, all I had was to swerve into the next lane over, which was under construction. I hit some barrels and off I went. As I skipped on the pavement like a rock, all I could think was, this is it. Everything felt like it was in slow motion. It felt like I bounced for miles. I finally came to a stop and plopped face down on the road. I was so dazed, and the adrenaline flooding into me was the single most intense feeling I've ever experienced. I pretty much just felt scratched up. I was able to stand up and walk over to the side of the road, where another car stopped and called 911. He looked at me like I was the Messiah himself, surprised I could walk after witnessing what happened. I asked if I could lean on his trunk, and he obliged. He kept me company until the paramedics arrived. I looked back to see I bled all over his spoiler. Sorry, dude. Thank you for comforting me at my lowest point. I later learned I had shattered 2 fingertips, got a massive gash in one knee, and minor road rash around the body. 2 days later, I walked out of the hospital. Full recovery took 5 or so months. I didn't let it stop me from riding, because it's a passion for me. The gear I had on saved my life, and I have that same helmet on my dresser. I silently thank it every day for saving me. Thanks for reading, and stay safe out there, guys. 25 years ago, my friend and I were cruising around some back roads outside of town. It was a regular school night, not doing anything crazy at all. 2 kids driving around and chatting about the things 17-year-olds chat about. We started heading back toward town on an unfamiliar road. It was dark. Seemingly out of nowhere, the road just ends. We flipped the truck end over end into a canal. We weren't going fast, and both were wearing seatbelts. No panic at first. We're okay. Upside down, but okay. We undo our seatbelts and attempt to open a window or door so we can escape. It's pitch black. We're under 8 feet of water. I'm fumbling around trying to figure out how to open the now upside down door. Nothing is where it should be. It's confusing. I can't get the door open. The cab starts to fill with water. Panic sets in. My door will just not open. Can't find the window lever. Water quickly rising. What the F? Is this how it ends? I'm only 17. As the water rises, my mind sort of splits in two. One side panicking, the other somewhat calm as I realize that this is going to be how it ends. I'm going to drown. I just started grade 11, and I'm going to drown. The water rises up to my neck. My door just won't open. Then my buddy yells, "I got my window, let's go." We're completely underwater now. I scramble over to his side and feel the opening. I pull myself through. I swim over to the embankment and climb up to the buddy. He's relieved to see me. We made it. I had another near-fatal encounter with the same canal 4 years later. I was about 12 years old, delivering newspapers on an old 10-speed bicycle. I was going down a steep hill with the papers under one arm and the other on the handlebars when I realized I was going way too fast and the brakes weren't working. To top it off, there was a car coming in the opposite direction of the home, up the hill. I saw a side street coming up I knew I had to duck into to avoid the car, but I was going very fast. There was a very high curb over a sewer grate that I hit directly and literally went flying. I'm not really sure what happened, but I think I just flew almost parallel to the ground and landed softly, sliding forward on soft grass. I ended up about 25 feet away from my bicycle, which had stopped right at the curb. I got up, I still had the newspapers under one arm, and had not a scratch on me. Did you ever take stock of the things you did as a child, and you're like, how did I come out of that unscathed? Where now, like, if I stand up out of a chair, I'm like, ooh, you know what I mean? I was riding on a jet ski behind my friend on my first day of vacation back to my country in the Middle Eastern coast. My friend was so excited to go, so he was driving first. This man was literally gunning at full speed and didn't slow down for the other boat's wakes. So, the third or fourth time the jet ski jumped, it ended up landing with the steering wheel at 90 degrees and we just got launched off of it. I remember the force of the impact and why people say hitting water at that speed is like hitting concrete. 2 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and a deviated stomach later, I had to swim back to the jet ski and climb back up while holding my ribs. GG, no re. When I was 11, I had whooping cough. I was sick for 3 months. One day I went to school and at the gate I had an uncontrollable coughing fit. Then my airways swelled up until I wasn't able to breathe. I was gasping for air. My classmates didn't know what was going on. I felt like I was dying. I literally couldn't breathe. I thought whooping cough was going to kill me by asphyxiation. I've never had asthma, but I know exactly what an asthma attack feels like. Side note, I was vaccinated for whooping cough when I was very little, but this vaccine becomes inactive after 10 years. Whooping cough is especially dangerous for very young kids, infants, and babies. They end up intubated in the pediatric intensive care, and it can kill them. So the vaccine protects against the disease in the most vulnerable stages of childhood, but not anymore after 10 years. My immune system was able to fight the disease, but I was still very sick for a long time. Imagine what could do to a toddler or a little baby. So let me take a moment to say, vaccinate your kids. Got hit by a drunk driver while walking home with some takeout for dinner. Waited at the crosswalk, walk light lit up, waited for left turn traffic to clear and the cars that would be going parallel to me to start moving forward, i.e. a situation that should be safe. Start walking and after a few steps hear some horns honking and tires screeching. Glance over and there's a truck. I found out later it was a Ford Explorer barreling right for me. I try to run and maybe make it a step before my face is bouncing off the hood of the truck. Had that, oh F, I might be about to die moment. It's been 4.5 years since then. And it's honestly still kind of traumatic to think about, though talking about it does help. I ended up having a compound tib-fib fracture in my right leg, didn't break skin but was bad enough to be compound, and a shattered pinky bone in my left hand. Leg required a rod and a few screws to put it back together. Finger needed a plate and 2 screws, more like wires with a spiral screw pattern. Both still have physical aches, pains, and limitations. Glad to be alive. In a lot of ways, I used this to make positive changes in my life, but I still wish it never happened. My choices since then were my choices, so I take full credit for them. The drunk asshole that hit me went to jail for about a year, and I got my uninsured motorist coverage paid out because the dude was on a suspended license from prior DUIs and didn't have insurance. Thankfully, my health insurance waiver claim on my own car insurance payout, it wouldn't have covered the not a bill total in the end. My parents were driving me to school, and they usually drop me off at this intersection at the corner of my school. When we got to the intersection, there was a car in front of us waiting at the stop sign because there were kids walking across the street. I get out of the car, wave goodbye to my parents, get to the crosswalk, and right as I step on the street, I slip on some ice. It was winter, and I also live in Canada, and my face lands on the pavement, facing forwards the person who's at the stop sign's car, 5 feet away from their tire. And then they start going. I was thinking, oh my god, my head is going to become a goddamn pancake on the road. But nope, they stopped literally as soon as they pressed down on the gas and only went like 1 to 2 feet forward. So I got up and walked across the rest of the street completely fine, besides my face hurting a bit.